Foreign countries that have been ripping us off for years are ecstatic. They're so happy. And they're dancing in the streets, but they won't be dancing for long.
It isn't that Canada won, it's that Trump lost.
We have breaking news, folks. In a surprising turn of events, the Supreme Court of the United States has ruled that Donald Trump's global tariffs are illegal and subsequently have been annulled. But that doesn't mean that Canada and all of the other countries around the world are now tariff-free. What's next? Let's take a look. From CNN, Supreme Court rules that Trump's sweeping emergency tariffs are illegal. The Supreme Court on Friday ruled that President Donald Trump violated federal law when he unilaterally imposed sweeping tariffs across the globe, a striking loss for the White House on an issue that has been central to the president's foreign policy and economic agenda. The decision is arguably the most important loss the second Trump administration has sustained at the conservative Supreme Court, which last year repeatedly sided with the president in a series of emergency rulings on immigration, the firing of leaders of independent agencies, and deep cuts to government spending. Chief Justice John Roberts wrote the majority opinion, and the court agreed 6-3 that the tariffs exceeded the law. The court, however, did not say what should happen to the more than $130 billion in tariffs that has already been collected. So, we covered these tariffs a while back when they were first implemented, and we covered the area of the U.S. law that they actually applied to. And one of the issues with that U.S. law was that emergency wasn't defined. And for that reason, you actually don't have to state what the emergency, really is. In order for it to adhere to any sort of definition. So when Trump says, oh, well, it's emergency, it's a national security emergency, it's an emergency because of the fentanyl crisis, there's actually not a test in the law that that definition has to apply to. So any president can cite any emergency to implement tariffs. Now, that's one opinion. Obviously, the Supreme Court looked at this and said, well, because there is no opinion, then you can't say that it does actually adhere to a definition. And the fact that he's applied this on a global scale, not just to Canada, this is the issue that I think Trump is coming up against within this Supreme Court decision. The other issue is that there's a lot of American businesses that are being hit by these tariffs, and they're actually having to pay them, right? So when Trump puts a tariff on goods coming in from Canada, it's not Canadians that pay that, it's the Americans and the American businesses that end up having to pay that and then pass that cost down to the Americans. How does that affect the economic success or failure of the Canadian businesses? Well, for all of the tariffs that are being imposed on Canadian goods, because that drives up the price down in the United States, it encourages businesses and Americans to buy goods from elsewhere, more domestically located, so that they're not paying that extra price in the tariff that is actually coming through. Now, in many cases, they have to pay that extra price, which is where they've collected almost $130 billion. And this is probably going to cause Trump some issues because he was counting on that money to be used elsewhere. So this is where he was a little upset. And we know he was upset because he had a press conference shortly after and made his feelings known about what he felt about the decision.
And I'm ashamed of certain members of the court, absolutely ashamed, for not having the courage to do what's right for our country. I'd like to thank and congratulate Justices Thomas, Alito, and Kavanaugh for their strength and wisdom and love of our country, which is right now very proud of those justices. When you read the dissenting opinions, there's no way that anyone can argue against them. There's no way. Foreign countries that have been ripping us off for years are ecstatic. They're so happy. And they're dancing in the streets, but they won't be dancing for long, that I can assure you. The Democrats on the court are thrilled, but they will automatically vote no. They're an automatic no, just like in Congress. They're an automatic no. They're against anything that makes America strong, healthy, and great again. They also are a, frankly, disgrace to our nation, those justices. They're an automatic no, no matter how good a case you have. It's a no. But you can't knock their loyalty. It's one thing you can do with some of our people. Others think they're being politically correct, which has happened before far too often with certain members of this court, and it's happened so often with this court. What a shame. Having to do with voting in particular, when in fact they're just being fools and lapdogs for the rhinos and the radical left Democrats, and not that this should have anything at all to do with it. They're very unpatriotic and disloyal to our Constitution.
So, Trump obviously isn't happy with the Supreme Court. And a couple of things that I noted there is he seems to be commenting positively on the justices that voted against the decision, and talks more about loyalty than justice in there. So you can interpret that from what you will, but in my humble opinion, no matter what party the president is representing, is it a good idea to infer that the Supreme Court should be voting based on loyalty to its party rather than what it believes the interpretation of the law is? That's the question. I don't know if that's the right response to that. So, now, what does this mean? Well, this means that there's $130 billion in money that the U.S. government has collected from Americans that is now up in the air. And Donald Trump has criticized the Supreme Court and saying, well, now there's going to be all these legal battles for the Americans to actually get that money back. Because if the Trumps were illegal, then that money shouldn't have been collected in the first place. Therefore, that means that that money should probably be returned to the Americans that actually paid that money. And that's going to cost court fees, and how many years is that going to take to actually sort out? So that's going to be an issue. This is what liberal commentator Scott Reed had to say on this. And it was interesting that he took this position. And you'll see in a minute what I mean by that.
From a political perspective about this really is the biggest blow, it feels like, that we've seen to Donald Trump, especially coming from a Supreme Court that he was able to stack with conservative justices his last time in office.
I think that's right. This is, in the narrow and precise sense, as you and Jeremy were talking about, I mean, this may not be the biggest reward possible for Canadian industry and Canadian workers, but this is an incredibly important development, in my view, on the political stage, because it gives us more leverage. It gives us more opportunity in terms of our negotiations. Why? It isn't that Canada won, it's that Trump lost. And that means that his options are fewer, his position is weaker, his power is demonstrably in decline. His ability to just demand things and say, I rule with full authority, it is visibly shrinking in front of us. And so when it comes to those CUSMA negotiations, when it comes to negotiating the remaining tariffs that are on steel and industry and others, this is going to give us opportunities. And in particular, not just because these tariffs have been declared unlawful, but because Trump has been pushed back. And with those midterms coming up, the number of Americans that are blaming him for a weakening economy, for higher prices, for trouble and job loss, all of that strengthens Canada's hand. And today's ruling, along with time, is putting us in a better position.
So notice that he didn't say, Carney is a genius. So that was actually very surprising. But he is right. It's not that Canada won anything. It's not that Carney is a genius. And it's not that, the Liberals have played this perfectly. It's that Trump lost in his own country, lost to his own Supreme Court. We had nothing to do with it. But Scott Reed is also trying to say, well, he's been pushed back. He's weak. He can't do. Not so fast, Mr. Reed, because Trump made another announcement shortly after. Trump announces 10% global tariff and rails against Supreme Court ruling. Trump also announced that he will impose a 10% global tariff on top of tariffs already in place. While these new levies can only take effect for a maximum of 150 days, barring congressional approval for an extension, Trump claimed, we have a right to do pretty much what we want to do. So what's happening here? Well, Trump is using another section of the law to impose a temporary tariff of 150 days. And he's announced that he has started investigations into this other section called Section 301, with a seemingly intent to extend those tariffs to ensure that he gets what he wants. So before Liberals and Canadians start thinking that they know what Trump is going to do and they understand U.S. law, none of us really understand U.S. law. We're not claiming to understand U.S. law. But this is what Trump means to do. And maybe he is banking on the fact that Congress is going to vote with him or not. Who knows? That remains to be seen. But what is apparent is that the tariffs aren't going away. And this was just the first in the series of decisions that are going to be taking us down this saga of what is going to be happening with these tariffs against Canada and the rest of the world. But it's very, very interesting to see what happens because, listen, I'm happy because tariffs on Canadian companies, that's not a good thing. Ask any Canadian business if tariffs are a good thing in Canada. They will tell you, no, they're not. So I think it's a good thing because the Supreme Court has ruled on that, and it was bipartisan. So they looked at the law and they said, listen, what he did isn't in line with the law, isn't in line with the spirit of the law, and therefore it's illegal. Now, Trump is doing what he feels is best for the success in the United States. As the president, that's his job to do that. But in my opinion, and in many people's opinion, tariffs are not a good thing for the trade relationship between the United States and Canada. It makes both of us poorer. And the one thing that has sustained this economic alliance, the closest economic alliance in the history of the planet, and the most profitable one, is that freer trade between the United States and Canada makes both countries richer. That's what it does. That's how we ended up with the auto sector that we have. And that's how we've ended up with a whole bunch of Canadians and Americans that work across the border, that have businesses that are set up on either side of the border, that almost act like they're in the same country. Countries across the world are envious of our geolocation in what's the word I'm looking for? In proximity, that's the word, to the greatest economy on the planet. Carney can talk whatever he wants about these European countries and about all these other countries we're establishing trade relationships with. You ask each one of them. You tell them, okay, so tomorrow you get to be Canada. Do you want to be Canada right next to the United States, or do you want to stay in Europe? And if anyone's being honest, they're going to be wanting to sit right next to the largest economy in the world. Now, do we need to diversify our economic approach to Canada's future? 100%. Absolutely. And Harper and the Conservatives, they started doing that. Over 50 agreements with countries by the time Harper was done. So again, Carney renewing a lot of these agreements doesn't make Canadian companies pick up and move over there. It's not how it works. And it takes years and years and years and years and years for that to happen, if Canadian companies can even afford it. So in the meantime, yes, the tariffs are gone, but it sounds like they're right back, and they're going to be here to stay, at least for the foreseeable future. So we'll see what happens next, but I'm expecting the liberal state media to crow about how much of a genius Mark Carney is and how he's played Donald Trump like a fiddle, when in fact, Carney had nothing to do with it at all.